collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees marks World Refugee Day.
A report released today by UNHCR shows that the number of refugees, asylum seekers and internally displaced people worldwide has for the first time since World War II exceeded 50 million people.
While the head of Cyprus Asylum Services says some asylum seekers try to hoodwink the authorities.
When we have to clarify whether somebody is a Syrian or not, because we have cases that in the past they claimed to be Palestinians and they cheated us. They were not Palestinians because now they come and say, I'm not a Palestinian, I'm a Syrian. I cheated you.
In the wake of a World Bank report, we discuss reforms to the education system with the Minister of Education and Culture.
I'm very optimistic that this time we'll manage to change the system.
And some good news for people who were missold property and mortgages. We'll hear the details from their UK lawyer.
We frankly believe that the same level of integrity for which the English courts are known, and properly so I think really, throughout the world, are not necessarily exhibited in Cyprus or other countries.
World Refugee Day was celebrated last Friday by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and their representative in Cyprus, Damtu Desalegn, announced some appalling statistics.
A report released today by UNHCR shows that the number of refugees, asylum seekers and internally displaced people worldwide has for the first time since World War II exceeded 50 million people. A total of 51.2 million people were forcibly displaced at the end of 2013, up a staggering 6 million from a year before. The number of refugees and asylum seekers among the displaced population stood at 17.9 million. Those displaced internally, meaning women, men and children, forced to flee their homes but still in their own country, amounted to a record 33.3 million. This massive increase was driven mainly by the war in Syria that had uprooted 9 million people, of whom 2.5 million across the border to Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq and Egypt. And on top of all this, we have a new displacement of people forced to flee their homes by the resurgent sectarian violence in Iraq. The media often focus on the fighting, the type of ammunition used, the war casualties, disagreements in the UN Security Council and failed peace accords, often ignoring the human story. On World Refugee Day, UNHCR aims to shift that focus to the devastating impact of war on families, individuals, children. On the occasion of this year's World Refugee Day, we have launched a global campaign, including here in Cyprus, to present refugee stories, personal loss, arduous journeys, hope and survival. This is the most urgent story of our time. And what we are celebrating today, as every year on the 20th of June, is the courage and resilience of these ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, of people who have endured enormous suffering without losing hope, and often find the strength to overcome despair and forge new lives in strange lands against seemingly overwhelming odds. Refugees are the great survivors of our time. They deserve our encouragement, support, and respect. In my service with UNHCR over the past 20 years, I have worked and befriended with thousands of refugees in different parts of the world. And I can tell you that they are among the most vulnerable and yet the most resilient people on earth. They bring valuable skills and are eager to support themselves and their families by hard work. And if given the chance, each can make a positive contribution to the whole society, economically, socially, and culturally. Unfortunately, refugees are not always afforded this chance in their country of asylum. They are not actively encouraged and supported to reach their full potential, left instead to drift through day-to-day existence. This is to some extent what seems to have pushed a group of refugees in Nicosia to go on hunger strike for the second time round. I am gravely concerned, as I know you are, about the health and welfare of these refugees who are on their 20th day of hunger strike. Some were also on strike for 4 days and resumed drinking water yesterday after receiving assurances from the authorities that their grievances will soon find appropriate remedies. Let us all be hopeful and optimistic. This will indeed come to pass without further undue hardship. These refugees, like many others in the country, have been trying for so long to pick up the pieces of their once peaceful lives and start and build a new future. The severe economic crisis the country fell into at the end of 2013 has had a disproportionate impact on many refugees and asylum seekers. They have lost jobs, struggled to find even low-wage employment, and seen access to social protection reduced. So on this World Refugee Day, let us offer them our respect, understanding, and support so that they can nurture and realize their hopes. Let us do everything we can to give them the full protection they deserve, and let us ensure that they do not forever remain refugees.
The UNHCR's representative in Cyprus, Damtu Desalange. Also speaking at the press conference to mark World Refugee Day was Cyprus head of Asylum Services, Magis Polidorou, and he was asked about the thorny issue of Syrians being detained in Cyprus.
In regard to the detentions in Menoia, from my point of view, asylum seekers should not be detained, and this is clear. We have an everyday cooperation with the authorities in charge to decide whether somebody will be in detention or not. We don't issue decisions for detention. Okay, I want to clarify that. But there is jurisprudence, case law, governing these cases. So, whether somebody is legally detained or not is based on the law and on the case law as well. So we intervene, but if, according to the courts and according to the other authorities, they are legally detained, of course we cannot do something. But I want to point out that in a lot of cases, after the cooperation with Mrs. Charalambous, okay, we proceed, okay, to the release of a lot of persons from detention. Just to mention that, when we have to clarify whether somebody is a Syrian or not, because we have cases that in the past they claimed to be Palestinians, and they cheated us. They were not Palestinians, because now they come and say, I'm not a Palestinian, I'm a Syrian. I cheated you. So, change my status. So, we have to investigate whether somebody is a Syrian. Let's say an undocumented person claims that I am a Syrian. And you have to do something, right? To verify that he's a Syrian and he's entitled to do something. Because according to the case law, if somebody used to reside illegally in Cyprus, let's say that somebody resided for some years and is apprehended, and the detention order are issued, and then he decides to apply, okay, then according to the law, he may be in detention, and we give priority to the examination of his case, and immediately, as soon as the decision is reached, if it's positive, he will be released. In case he's not, I mean, he's not entitled to a regime, he will be deported. But in regard to Syria, if he's a Syrian, he will be released unless other reasons, let's say that criminal issues or security issues, this is something else.
The head of Cyprus Asylum Services, Magis Polidorou.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The education system has been in the news against recently following a World Bank report that's taken a look at both the structures we have in place, the curricula, and pretty well everything else to do with our education system. Great pleasure to welcome to the programme the Minister of Education, who's going to discuss with us some of the possibilities and what he hopes to achieve. Can we start with the suggestions that the World Bank made? They were pretty clear, but you did come out afterwards and say they're not binding, but they seem like being very good ideas.
Yes. Actually, we have two reports. The first one focuses on the teacher policies that we adopt in Cyprus, and the second one focuses on the analysis of the function and structure of the Ministry of Education and Culture. Now, regarding the teacher policies report, as you said, non-binding policy measures are discussed on three key areas. The first one is the teacher selection and recruitment system. The second one is the teacher evaluation and promotion system. And the third one is the teacher professional development. Actually, the philosophy behind all these measures is to have the most competent, effective and well-trained teachers in our education system for the benefit of our children.
So but that's not happening at the moment, is it? Because a lot of the best possible teachers are sitting for 20 or even 30 years on a waiting list, and by the time they become teachers, I imagine their training somewhat out of date.
Yes, exactly. Now, the selection system that exists now actually places emphasis on the timing of graduation. So we want to change the system. Actually, most of the teachers are hired a few years before they retire. So this is problematic. We want to change it.
But other ministers, forgive me, have also wanted to change it, and I've been talking about this probably for the last 15 years. Why has nobody managed to do what seems to be the most obvious thing to improve the education our children are getting?
Actually, 9 ministers dealt with this issue. But I think now that the society is matured and the stakeholders are very willing to see change, and we will work in a systematic and very carefully. We will very carefully in order to change the system. I think we have good recommendations by the World Bank. We have previous reports. We know where the differences existed in previous efforts, and we will work on that. We set up committees, technical committees that will go through the recommendations of the World Bank, and we will examine the previous proposed systems, and then we'll come with another framework that will be discussed in a structured dialogue with all the stakeholders. I'm very optimistic that this time we'll manage to change the system.
It's always come up against the teachers threatening to go on strike, their union saying this isn't fair. Has that changed? Because it doesn't seem to have
I think
done.
that the teachers have also recognized that we need a change in this system. Yes, they recognize it, and they are ready to discuss. This is the feeling that I have from preliminary discussions that I had with them. And I'm optimistic that if we sit on the same table and we'll discuss all the options that we have in front of us, we'll reach a solution. Yes.
The other thing that the World Bank came out with was the fact that in Cyprus we spend more per capita on education than many, many other countries, and yet they have better results. Now that is really worrying, particularly when at the moment I'm presuming every penny spent by the government needs to be showing good results for being spent.
Exactly. Well, the problem is that we have the best teachers, the most qualified teachers. We have high investment in education, and the results in international competitions are very poor.
Have you any idea why that is?
Yes, there are a lot of practices that need to change, and the World Bank suggests many change towards this direction. How we will spend our investment in education more effectively. So there are measures that we can take regarding the teachers. As I mentioned before, we need the most competent and the most well-trained teachers in our educational system. But we also need more modern curricula and a change in the time that students spend in each curriculum.
So are you thinking that maybe, I mean, it's been mooted before, we need to change the school hours to make it, like elsewhere in Europe, a pretty full day? Is that one of the options?
Well, this is again one of the suggestions that we will consider. It's not only the time, it's also the content.
And the content very often is taught by rote here. You're taught to repeat what the teacher says and then write it down when it comes to exam time. Have you got any plans at all to change the whole system so that we're doing our kids a favour and teaching them to think and to ask questions?
Mm-hmm. This is what we will go for. And many of the recommendations of the World Bank are going towards this direction. And also there are many previous efforts to reform the training system and the professional development of our teachers. And we will consider all these proposals. Actually, one technical team was set up recently in order to examine the whole framework of the teacher development system. And I expect that by the end of July they will come up with a proposal regarding the whole system. We need to give motivations to our teachers in order to be well trained and to offer the best knowledge and skills to our students, to our pupils.
The other big question, of course, is the time frame. I know that this probably can't be introduced in the middle of a school year, and if your report comes in July, it almost certainly won't be introduced for the next school year in September. Can you do it for the following one? Time seems to me to be of the essence, because what we need is young people leaving school with the inquiring minds that we need for the entrepreneurs that are going to get us out of the financial mess we're in.
Okay. As you mentioned before, many of the issues that are discussed in the reports of the World Bank are pending for years. So I don't think that it will be a problem if we postpone the implementation of a new measure for a few months. For each one of the measures that we will propose, we have a time frame. A time frame that includes the dialogue with the stakeholders, includes the study of other successful approaches that were adopted elsewhere, the study of previous reports, the study of the World Bank reports, and the formulation and the development of a new framework, a new proposal. So this will take, for each measure, certain time. But this time we have a time frame. For each measure we have a specific time frame, which it depends on the measure. For example, we have a time frame for a measure that lasts for 3 months, let's say, and we have other measures that will be adapted in 3 years. It depends on the philosophy and the nature of each of the measures that we will examine.
But those measures can run concurrently, so
yes.
An end time frame would be, for example, 3 years. Surely you'll be able to introduce some of the changes before then, or are you going to do it all in one big change?
Well, again, it depends on the measure. For example, I will talk a little bit about the whole issue of the selection recruitment system. We will make all the work during the summer, and we will start discussing the new framework during the summer, and we think that by the end of the year we will be ready to propose a new system that will be adapted maybe in the next year. So this is how we will work with technical scientific teams that will prepare new proposals within a specific time frame for each of the issues that we will elaborate.
Are you confident you can put all of this in place before the next election?
Yes, this is what we will try to do, but I am confident because we work without any political, let's say, constraints. I'm not a politician, okay, and I work with my team based on scientific approaches, and I'm very optimistic that with the consensus of all the stakeholders, we reach in measures that will be for the benefit of our children and for the modernization of our educational system.
The Minister of Education, Kostas Kathis. This is the Cyprus News Digest. I'm Rosie Charalambous. If you'd like to get in touch, don't forget you can email us, cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
Listen online to the Cyprus News Digest on YouTube or at cyprusmail.libsyn.com. The latest program is uploaded every Friday, and if you missed one, you can catch up there.
And now some of the other stories making the headlines this week. Cyprus remains a source and destination country for both men and women subjected to forced labour and sex trafficking. That's according to the US State Department in its 2014 Global Trafficking Report. Despite efforts to meet minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking, the Cyprus government did not demonstrate an overall increase in those efforts compared to the previous reporting period, it said. In fact, investigations into trafficking, prosecutions and convictions all fell by more than half. The island is bracing for a heat wave over the next few days, with temperatures, according to the Department of Meteorology, going to rise above 40 degrees. Well, that'll be good news for divers who are planning to attend Xenovia Week. The Xenovia, of course, is regarded as a top diving site in the world with some 60,000 visitors a year. And down in Larnaca, that is going to be celebrated with doubtless people coming from far and wide. Soon they may also be going to Paphos, because an old wreck, the Labo, has been sunk off the Yeroskipu coast, and its aim is to create an artificial reef. They're hoping that it will prove as popular among divers eventually as the Xenovia wreck off the coast of Larnaca. And more good news. The Archbishop has announced the restoration of Apostolos Andreas, that's the Greek Orthodox monastery on the eastern tip of the Karpas Peninsula, will begin in September. He made the announcement after meeting with Turkish Cypriot Mufti Talip Atalay in the house of the Swedish ambassador.
Online and as a podcast, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The thorny issue of title deeds is something that comes up regularly in Cyprus, and it doesn't just affect expatriate homeowners. But what's perhaps less well known is the story of some 15,000 people who fell for glossy sales talk to part with their hard-earned cash and buy their dream home on the island. They eagerly accepted loans from Cypriot banks, often, as I'm sure you've read in the press, in Swiss francs because of low interest rates. The Swiss franc, however, has strengthened in value with interest rate hikes, and investors are paying a heavy price. And of course, with the current situation regarding non-performing loans, the position of many is, to say the least, precarious. But for those who have resorted to legal means, there's been some encouraging news this week with the settlement of several hundred claims brought against Cyprus banks, developers and lawyers. Duncan McNair is a lawyer representing around 100 victims of what he terms this mortgage and property mis-selling. He joins us now. Duncan, thanks very much indeed. But first, some people might say if you're buying a house, you should be very careful what you sign and read the terms of your contract and your mortgage very carefully before you do so. What's your answer to that?
Well, there are several elements to that, and I think I need Rosie to slightly expand on what you've said. The background to this matter, as many of your listeners will know, is that many thousands of properties were sold off-plan in Cyprus between broadly 2005 and 2010. They were often sold in a rather hurried way by developers in, I'm afraid, what have turned out to be rather close association with selling agents and banks and lawyers who were appointed ostensibly on behalf of the purchasers, but in fact we say, and I know it's a bold claim, but it's borne out by enormous amounts of evidence we've collected, with overly close relationships with the very people they should have been protecting their supposed clients against. This is an important transaction for people, and you need separate, independent, objective advice. These people did not get it. But of course the position is worse than that, because the loans that were taken were, as you say, denominated in a foreign currency, typically Swiss francs. No proper advice was given, we say, and often precisely the wrong advice on the risks of taking a mortgage in a foreign currency. No proper reference made to the lurches between respective currencies, so that when the Swiss franc strengthened, the mortgage payments went through the roof. Those are some of the elements that are so concerning and have caused not only, this is against, of course, a dramatically falling property market in Cyprus, as your listeners will know, but enormous rises in monthly mortgage commitments, and I'm afraid a great deal of interest rate hikes regularly applied by the bank, all the different Cyprus banks, to inflate their profits.
Duncan, let me interrupt just a moment. I'm not very good on money, but it does seem to me that I've been brought up that if it's too good to be true, it probably is. What advice were these buyers given to persuade them to accept mortgages in a different currency?
Well, they were given various advice. In the relation to that matter, they were told, typically, not all, each case turns rather on its facts, but they were told this is the currency in which you should take your mortgage because it's going to be much cheaper, or they were told this is the only currency available for you to take a mortgage. There are different cases. I'm acting in a very large number of them here at Cubism Law, and we're finding that sort of either zero advice or positively wrong advice was regularly and routinely given. But it gets much worse, because the very documents that were the key contractual documents that committed clients to these situations were often signed without their knowledge, without their understanding. Sometimes they didn't see them in English, by lawyers who were appointed over their heads to hold powers of attorney, often improperly executed.
Sorry, how can somebody be appointed power of attorney over somebody's head? You've surely got to sign that.
Well, you say surely, and that's a very good word, but often the powers of attorney were not signed. Sometimes they were not properly executed in accordance with Cypriot law. And the most important point is that these were lawyers who were not acting independently of the parties who recommended they be appointed for the purchaser of the property.
I mentioned in the introduction that the title deeds issue is something that's been going on for years here in Cyprus, and I've spoken regularly on previous programmes to people about who recommends lawyers and so on. Are you saying here that developers recommended lawyers? And I know that in the past we've talked about developers being very friendly with the bank manager who grants the mortgage and so on. Are you talking about collusion, basically, between developers and lawyers?
It certainly looks that way. You may or may not be surprised to hear, Rosie, that, for example, we've got quite a few examples of the lawyers being married to the developers that were selling the properties, and yet the lawyers were meant to be acting independently, quite obviously, of the developers.
And yet, Duncan, again, forgive me for interrupting, but if you go and look online to various sites that suggest if you're thinking of buying a property, there are certain best practices, and one of the best that I've ever come across is the fact that if you're dealing with a developer in Paphos, you make jolly sure that you hire a lawyer from Nicosia, for example. Again, there is surely some amount of responsibility lying with the purchasers.
Well, indeed there is, but it's a question of how much responsibility. And I've seen, like you, lists of lawyers. Indeed, I've seen the British High Commission, the Cypriot High Commission list of approved lawyers. At least one of those, I'm afraid, has a judgment against them in the Cyprus courts for a misuse of a power of attorney. I think that judgment is being appealed, but nonetheless. But the fact is that these are often, with respect to them, people not used to undertaking very rapid commercial decisions in a jurisdiction foreign to them, with systems unknown to them, and let alone do they expect that the lawyer who is appointed to act for them is in fact extremely close to, perhaps married to, their very counterparty. These are not fictitious inventions, these are born of hard facts. And there's a good deal that our files disclose about that. These are not the only complaints, but they're very serious ones that include that are included in the claims that we have brought.
Well, let's come on to the encouraging news. Tell me about the settlement of some of these claims.
Well, there was a very large action brought in the English courts by 247 individuals claiming against a developer called Alpha Panaretti Public Limited and also against Alpha Bank Cyprus Limited. Hearing took place in 2012 when it was decided that the claimants could sue Alpha Panaretti in England. Alpha Panaretti and its director appealed. The appeal was due to be heard earlier this month, but on the brink of the steps of court, a settlement was reached whereby a framework for dealing with all of those claims brought against Alpha Bank has been agreed, and now those terms are being implemented, whilst the claims against Alpha Panaretti and the other defendants in that action are stayed pending the implementation of those terms with Alpha Bank. The reason this is very important, Rosie, is because it shows that whilst this crucial issue of jurisdiction, which, as you know, means whether these claims should ultimately be heard before the English courts or the Cyprus courts, was red hot, nonetheless, the bank has recognised that it was at risk of losing that argument in the English courts and decided to settle those cases. This was an advanced case, a very early case. There are many thousands of cases coming up behind it that were stayed or postponed pending the outcome. Generally, this news is very good for investors or purchasers who have been so damaged by these events. The only downside is they now don't have a formal precedent of the English courts to rely on because there was a deal that was without prejudice. We don't know what the terms are. We believe we've got a shrewd idea, but nonetheless it shows that the banks are prepared to bow to the risks they run of these cases being heard in England, where we believe they would be defeated in their defences.
As opposed to being heard in Cyprus, when you think what would happen?
Well, I'm not a Cyprus qualified lawyer, but we think that the elements of the Cyprus system are not as favourable. They're not always entirely as rapid. We frankly believe that the same level of integrity for which the English courts are known, and properly so, I think, really, throughout the world, are not necessarily exhibited in Cyprus or other countries. By the way, just so there's no misapprehension, I make no slight whatever against the good people of Cyprus and its other aspects and institutions, but there are problems, and we fear that there would not be the same a correct outcome in Cyprus as we believe there would be in England. There's already... Sorry.
I was going to just ask you very quickly, because we're short of time now, about EU law, because how does that play under all of this? We're both EU countries.
Well, that's a very good point. There are several important elements, particularly. One is that it's important for those who want to make a claim, who believe that they've been missold a mortgage or indeed a property because it's not built out or it's never been built at all, to get their claims in England before they then sue protectively in Cyprus as well. That's a very important element in EU law, that you should assert the English jurisdiction first. That's extremely important. The other terribly dangerous element, Rosie, is if people do nothing, they will be sued in the Cyprus courts by the Cyprus banks if their loan is non-performing, i.e. if they're not paying their monthly repayments. That can lead very rapidly to a judgment, often when they don't even know the proceedings have been brought against them, and that is turned into something truly powerful and dreadful for purchasers, called a European enforcement order, that can then be targeted to enforce your UK assets, your UK house. So EU law is crucial to this in these two respects and many others.
We'll wait with interest to hear the outcome of future actions, and do keep in touch with us, Duncan. Property here is one of the things that, as you said, boomed for many, many years, and there are an awful lot of people, both Cypriot and expatriates, who've burnt their fingers. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.